It's 7:02, so we'll get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. It's exciting to have so many people join us on a Monday night. Tonight, as we come to the end of Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, we can't help but reflect on current events. Now is a difficult time for the global Jewish community and for our eternal homeland of Israel. The continued holding of hostages and ongoing war against the extremist organization Hamas, whose atrocities are excused, denied, and justified by many, threatens Israel. At home, escalating rhetoric and violence harkens back on our people's darkest chapter. Human chains to exclude Jews from places of higher learning, mob mentality, and calls for the death of the Jewish people can once again be heard. As challenging as this moment is, I know that in the end, the resilience of the Jewish people will win the day. Tonight, we will hear one such story of resilience. In its telling, our bearing witness, and its retelling, we help to ensure that history will not be repeated. The Jewish people cannot and will not be silent. I am honored to introduce a friend, our speaker tonight, Fred Schoenfeld, who I got to know when he was honored as a legend of the Maccabiah in 2018 for his efforts to establish a successful Maccabi USA soccer program, a Jewish soccer program that has continued to grow and flourish on the foundation he built in the 70s and 80s. Fred is an American success story, a gentleman, a survivor, and an inspiration. We are grateful to Fred for his generous offer to share his personal story so that we may all know where we came from and where we will never go back. And with that, Fred, I turn it to you.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here and with you. I see many familiar faces. Before I start my story, I just want to transgress and tell you a few things which some of you probably, I'm sure, never knew. Before there was a Maccabi USA, it was a U.S. Committee Sports for Israel. In 1948, after the State of Israel was formed, four gentlemen in New York formed the committee, U.S. Committee Sports for Israel. The committee would raise funds and support many sporting organizations in Israel, such as the Wingate Sports Institute, the Elan Sports Center for the Disabled, Beit HaLochem, the International Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. And of course, in 1950, they were asked to send a team to the first post-war Maccabiah in Israel. The four men, I have the names of three of them. One of them was Harry Zinman. The other one was Haskell Cohen, who at that time was the publicist for the NBA. And there was a Colonel Henschel, who was the president at the Bulababa Watch Company, which was the biggest, largest watch company in the United States. And a fourth person, which I don't know. So they sent the team in 1950. They sent about 65 athletes to Israel for the games. I myself got involved. I attended the opening ceremony in 1977, and I got hooked, and I joined the organization. In 1981, I was named chairman of the soccer team. And by the way, just to put it in perspective, I had to raise $2,000 per athlete. And in those days, $2,000 was a lot of money. But anyway, in 1981, the president of the U.S. Sports Committee was the famous basketball coach, Nat Holman. And we went to the games. When we came back, the organization was based in New York. After the 1981 games, most of the people who were involved with the organization quit. They had their fill, they had their adventure in Israel, and they just walked away. So one morning in August of 1981, certain famous gentlemen from Philadelphia and Washington drove to New York in a U-Haul. It was the late Bob Spivak, Billy Stearman, David Pincus. They came into New York, went to the office. They emptied out all the records and everything. Plus, they found many unpaid bills, which were never paid. They had to take over. They loaded the truck, and we went to have lunch. At lunch, they said, "Folks, this is our executive committee. We're the committee. We have to elect the board." Spivak became the president, whatever, and all of a sudden they point to me, "You're the recording secretary." And I said, "Are you kidding? I just joined the organization. What do I know about the organ? It wasn't for me." So I said, "Well, you have to do it because there's nobody else." And don't worry, we were just hiring our first executive director, which was Barbara Lissy, and she'll take care of it. And that's how I got involved. Few of the milestones. At the 1985 games, I had 4 Russian kids on my soccer team who had never been bar mitzvah. My rabbi from New York happened to have been in Israel at the same time, and we went to the wall and we had a bar mitzvah. And that was the foundation where all the bar mitzvahs that we all do now in every games started. At the same games, Toni Wertman, I don't know whether she's on or not, and her friend Sandy Blumberg brought their dance troupe along with us with the team, and they performed. And on the way back, they got very enthusiastic, but you know, those days it was a boys' club. There were no women involved in the organization. And I still remember on the plane ride back, they came to me and they thought I was the youngest amongst the group. They were trying with me. They told me that they wanted to get involved in the organization, but they're getting rejected. So I remember giving them a pep talk on the plane. I said, "You got to stick your nose in and just push and push, and the rest is history. You know what happened. You know who's running the show today." And then at the 1989 games, Bob Spivak instituted the first, what he called a pre-camp, where the team went over a few days earlier, and we toured with them all over the United States, all over Israel. And that was the beginning of the job that the organization is doing today, taking all these kids who have never been to Israel and telling them the history and our heritage. And that was the start. And after that, the rest is history. And I am so proud of all the stuff that Maccabi USA is doing today, not only by sending hundreds and hundreds of athletes to the games, but they learn about our Jewish heritage, they learn about Judaism, and in these days, you know how important that is. So now to my story. For many years, I never considered myself a Holocaust survivor. In my mind, I thought a Holocaust survivor is a person who went to a concentration camp, survived, and he's a survivor. Even today, when I speak to schools, the first thing the kids ask me, "Show me your arm with the tattooed numbers." I was lucky I did not go to a concentration camp. But my kids kept insisting, "You were there during the Holocaust, you survived, therefore you're a survivor." So after thinking about it and after seeing all these books coming out denying that there was a Holocaust and all these articles in the magazines, I decided that I am a survivor. And for the last 10 years, I've been speaking to schools and synagogues and telling my story. So can I have the map, please, Lior? Okay, so this is the map. This is the map of Czechoslovakia when it was still a country. Czechoslovakia was formed in 1918, right after the First World War. And you see, I was born in the town which you see up there, Košice. And Czechoslovakia was a democracy. It was the Constitution was signed, was the exact copy of the United States Constitution. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Everybody was equal, and everybody got along. Yes, there was anti-Semitism, but everything was great. But if you remember some of the history, when Hitler came to power in 1938, he took over, walked into Austria, and then he wanted part of Czechoslovakia in the west part of the Czechoslovakia lived about 1 million Germans. It's called the famous area of Sudetenland. And at the bottom, in the south, in Slovakia, were a lot of Hungarians. So in 1938, when Hitler went into Austria, and then his next step was he wanted to liberate the German-speaking people in the Sudetenlands. So he wanted to have the territory. There was a famous peace conference in Munich, led by the Prime Minister of England, Neville Chamberlain, who went to make peace with Hitler, and he gave Hitler Sudetenland, a piece of Czechoslovakia. Sounds a little bit just like what's happening today with Putin and the Ukraine. It's history repeating itself. And in the south, near my town, there were many Hungarian people speaking. So Hungary took that over, and the country was split. There was the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Slovakia became a fascist puppet government allied with Germany. So because my father had his business in Košice, and that part was becoming Hungary, we moved a little bit north to another town called Prešov, and that's where we moved to, and with Slovakia. So Slovakia was a agricultural peasant country, not too many universities, but everything was going pretty as usual, lots of anti-Semitism, but everybody was coping. In 1940, the Slovak government, the fascist government, started to put in all kinds of anti-Jewish regulations. First of all, everybody had to register with the government. You had to give them your assets, your bank accounts, everything that you owned. You had to register, and then they started putting in all these restrictions. So I was a little kid. What did it mean to me? I remember certain things. I remember very, very closely. For instance, we couldn't go to the playground. We had no place to go to the playground. The only place that we could go to play was in the courtyard of our synagogue. However, to get to the courtyard, you took a risk, because chances are that you would be met on the street by a bunch of bullies twice your age, and you would get beaten up. So I still remember my friend had 2 huge German shepherds, huge dogs, and he would get the 2 dogs, and he would be our escort to the playground. I used to go to the movies with my father every Sunday afternoon. No Jews allowed in the movies. Couldn't go to the parks. The town that I lived, everybody over the age of 9 had to wear a yellow Jewish star. The town that I lived in, Slovakia at that time, had about Jewish population of about 120,000, and out of the 120,000, only about 28,000 survived the Holocaust. The town that I lived in had population of about 25,000 and about 6,000 Jews. 700 Jews survived after the war. Today, there isn't a single Jew in that town. So I still remember I was in the second grade, and I was going to school, and I was met by the teacher at the front door, and she pointed me away from my regular seat, and she pointed me to sit in the back of the room with another 3 or 4 Jewish kids. So this was the way it was. In 1940, it was 1942. My grandfather lived in another town close by, nearby, about 30 miles from our house, and we wanted to go to spend Passover with him. Of course, to travel, you needed special permission. My father had it because he was in business. So we made our way to the town, and usually, especially on Jewish holidays, they always put in a curfew. They didn't want the Jews to go out at night. They knew when the holidays came out, and however, we were determined to go. I still remember my mother got dressed up in peasant clothes, and we waited till it got dark, and we made our way to my grandfather's house. Can I have picture number 1, please? That's a picture of my grandfather, and that cute kid with the fancy bicycle, that's me. So we went to the Seder. My mother got dressed in peasant clothes, and we snuck across town, and we spent the Seder with my grandfather. That was the last time that I saw him. On May 10th, 1942, he was loaded on a transport train, and he went to Auschwitz. The reason I know that was exactly May 10th because the Germans kept meticulous records, and I can click on the Yad Vashem website, and there he is, and he's recorded as being dying on May 10th, 1942. So then the Jews were getting all these regulations started coming, and in 1942, right after this, they issued an order. They were taking all the single women supposedly to a work camp in Germany. My town, the middle of the town, you had the railroad tracks, and that's where the freight cars would come in, and you knew the trains were there. And they started taking these girls. Supposedly, they were going to work in Germany. But what happened was they couldn't load the cars. There weren't enough people to load the cars, and they weren't going to go back empty. And this is where we had our closest call. My family had the closest call. My father came running up to the house, and he told my mother and me to get into bed, and I was to pretend that I was sick. And sure enough, the 2 guys came up into the apartment, and they told my mother to get dressed and to go with them. And my father started to explain to them that that I'm sick, and they have to, she has to take care of me. And by sheer luck, the guy looked around, turned around, and walked out. So there was a very, very close call that we had. And by the way, I forgot to mention that the Slovak government, which was fascist, there were no Germans in Slovakia at that time. They had their own fascist government. They had their guards, and they're the ones who took care of the Jews. So in 1942, they started deporting the Jews. So Slovakia, as I told you, was an agricultural country, not too sophisticated. Most of the doctors most of the dentists, businessmen, uh, were all Jews. So they didn't want to get rid of all the Jews. Some of them are still performing, their jobs. They didn't want to get rid of them all at once. So if you fit one of those categories, you would get an exemption. They call it an exemption A, which meant that you were safe. They're not going to take you. However, again, when the empty train would roll into town, we knew that they were going to start to round up the Jews. Even though my family and my father was in business and he had the exemption, and the reason he had the exemption was that he was in business. And I forgot to have a document here, which you probably won't be able to see. It's dated May 29th, 1943. One of the restrictions that they had on the Jews, even though you were in business, you no longer could be the owner. You could work in the business, but they had a non-Jew who was in charge. This is the document which is now turned yellow, which stated that my father was no longer the owner, and this person was going to run the business. This person, by the way, turned out to be one of our saviors. So anyway, so when the trains were loading the trains, my father didn't want to take a chance of being around. So we went up to, he had a huge warehouse, and we went up to the attic of the warehouse, and that's what, to hide while the deportations were going on. So it was up in the attic. During the day, people were working there. You had to stay quiet. At night, there was no light. And to this day, I still am amazed how my mother could keep me quiet. We were there for 7 weeks. How she could keep me quiet, because any peep out of me and the show would be over. As a matter of fact, after 7 weeks, when there were no more trains, we came back out into the open. I remember none of us could speak, because if you whisper for 7 weeks, you lose your voice. So everything went back to normal for a while, till a few months later, transports resumed. When they resumed, we did exactly the same thing. At that time, you needed another exemption. They narrowed the gap, and my father got the other one too. But again, we did the same thing again. We went back again for 7 weeks. After the time was up, most of the Jews in our area were gone. Some of them were still hiding in different places. And then the government told us that all the Jews had to move from the eastern part of Slovakia towards the west. And the eastern part of Slovakia was supposed to be free of the Jews. So we moved to the west, and we found a farm where we rented some rooms, and we lived there all throughout the whole area. Whatever Jews were still left, that's what they did. They were trying to hide. And so we were now in the year 1944, the summer of 1944. So we lived on this farm. I still remember it was during the high holidays of that year, and my father organized services for the high holidays. And I still remember every room in this house had a big cross. And I remember my father taking a sheet, and he covered the cross, and he conducted services. And then that night, the landlady came in being very angry. What was going on here? I hear there were so many people in your apartment. What was going on here? So my father said, no, it's nothing. I only had about 3 or 4 people. And I, being a perfect kid, I said, oh, no, we had lots and lots of people. And I got into trouble. So you see, certain things I remember, and that's one of the things that I remember. So we stayed there during the summer. And that summer, the war was progressing. From the west, the United States Army was coming through. General Patton's army was coming towards Prague. From the east was the Russian army, together with the Czech Free Army. And to make things, there was an uprising not too far from us. The Free Czech people, they tried to hit the Germans from the back, and they started an uprising. And it lasted for about 6 or 7 weeks. Russian troops, partisans would parachuted to help them out. But the Germans finally got tired of it because these partisans would be blowing up trains and whatever. So the Germans came into the country, and they destroyed the uprising. So the Slovaks went back to their homes, but the Russian partisans had no place to go. So they went up to the Tatra mountains, which are high mountains of Slovakia. And we knew that we had to leave. We couldn't stay where we were. So we went to the mountains. There were all kinds of hunting lodges all over the place. That's where we went. About 100 miles each way. In each group, in each place, there were 40 Jews, 30 Jews. And so we went to one of these places. And we stayed, the partisans stayed with us. During the night, they would go and destroy, blow up railroad tracks and whatever. And they were our only source of food. They used to bring us food. Sometimes we had food and sometimes we didn't. One time I know that what we had, they actually brought up a living cow up to the mountains. They slaughtered it, and we had the first time that we had meat in a long time. My mother was the chef, and so that's one of the things that I remember. So this brings us to the winter of 1944, and by that time we could hear airplanes flying all over our head, and we heard all kinds of artillery firings. We were high up in the mountains. As we were looking down to the valley, that's where the Germans established. They dug in. That's where the Germans established a line, and they were going to oppose the Russians. And you could see from up in the mountains, we could see the bombs, artillery shooting, and the craters that they created in the snow. And one day, late in the afternoon, we see a whole bunch of soldiers climbing up to the mountains. Everybody got very hysterical, and we didn't know who. Obviously, we thought it was the Germans, but it was a big surprise. It was the Russian army, Russian soldiers, together with the Czech Free Army, which consisted of lots of Jews. They were climbing up the hill, and they explained to us they were going to try to hit the Germans from the rear, and to make progress. They told us to stay and to just hold on. They'll be back in 3 or 4 days, and it will be safe. What I remember about that day, I will never forget, I was looking at this gorgeous, big, tall soldier, and he was speaking Yiddish. He was a Jew. You have no idea what the feeling that I had. So they came, they left, and the next morning we woke up to tremendous noise, guns going off all over the place. They were on their way back. They said that the Germans were dug in very, very deep. It could take weeks before they would be dislodged, and they told us to come with them. If we can't stay there, they were going to take us with them. So they lined us up early in the morning. They lined us up in a long, long line, separated. Each one was separated. There were about 40 of us. I was the second youngest. and they told us that we would have to go across the front, and they gave us instructions that when we hear a whistling sound, that meant that those are bullets, artillery coming, and we had to hit the ground. So we started out early in the morning. I remember part of the way we would be crawling, and it was a sight that I will never forget. Seeing dead bodies, some of them bloodied on the beautiful white snow. And we made our way slowly, very, very slowly, because every time we had to hit the ground because bullets were flying all over. By the end of the day, we crossed the line and went into an army camp, and we were free in February 1945. So we stayed there overnight, and the next day we got into an army truck and we went back to our hometown. We could not go back to our house because somebody else was living there. However, we did go back. My father did go back to the backyard. Nobody could stop us from going to the backyard. Before we left, before we left the town, my father buried in the backyard our menorah, our candlesticks, and this silver Kiddush cup, which is by now, it's got to be about 100 years old. This cup is now a relic in our family, from Friday night Kiddush to weddings, to bar mitzvahs, and even to a bris. And it's unbelievable that it's a treasure. So what did our town look like? I remember going every afternoon. The army trucks would come from the east, bringing home survivors. Some of them came still in their striped uniforms, which you probably all know from pictures. I saw many happy reunions, and also people who never came back. So life started. Everybody tried to get their pieces together. There were many families completely desecrated, and life started. Every married Jewish woman got pregnant very soon, and that's with my sister who's watching. She was born after the war, and things started to get normal. The country was reunited again. It was no longer it was once again Czechoslovakia. And right after the war, my father had two brothers and a sister living in the United States. And immediately they got in touch with us and they sent us papers. They wanted us to come to the States. My father said, "Why should I go? Everything is okay here. We have a democracy." 6 weeks after the war was over, he was back in business. He didn't want to go. Why should I go? So his brother convinced him to file the papers, which we filed. So Jewish life became normal. We even had people from the state of Israel wasn't formed yet, but we had emissaries who came to our town. They organized, especially the young people who were orphans. They organized them because they were going to take them to Israel as soon as the state was established. We had Zionist organizations. By the way, we even had a Maccabi sports club. And I remember going to soccer games where the spectators, we would throw stones at the Maccabi players because we were Jews, right? So life was coming to normal. But then in 1948, the communists came to power, and the state of Israel was formed, and most of the Jews were going to Israel, and we were going to the States. Most of my friends were going to Israel, and I was ashamed to tell them that I was coming to the United States because it was the easy way. I was a Zionist. The teachers, we knew all the Hebrew songs and the Haganah and all that stuff. However, we came to the United States. I went to school. I went to college, and then I and my family. And that's the rest is history, but not the end of the story. So my kids were not finished with me. They wanted to go to Slovakia. They wanted to see where I came from. But they knew my story. They wanted to be witnesses. There was no way that I was going back to Slovakia, ever. But they kept bugging, and finally I said, I'm not spending my vacation there. I'll give you 4 days. I figured out that in 4 days I could show them everything that I wanted to, and we decided to go. It was in 1998, exactly 50 years after I left. Before I even left, I already started to get bad vibes. Remember, I told you that while we were hiding, that one man, probably forgot to tell you, used to come and bring us food and water every day at night. Without him, we probably wouldn't be able to survive. So he no longer was alive, but his children and his grandchildren, I'm sure, were alive. So I wanted to try to find him, and I wanted to tell his kids and his grandchildren that that their father saved my life. I also wanted to see if I could get him registered amongst the righteous Gentiles. Those of you who've been to Jerusalem, you know Yad Vashem. As you walk up to the hill to Yad Vashem, you have all these trees, and every tree is dedicated to somebody who saved the Jew during the Holocaust. I wanted to do the same thing for him. So I got in touch with City Hall, and I wanted to see if I could find this person. And the first question that they asked me was whether it's a relative of mine. I said, no. So he said, well, they only give out information to relatives. So this is the reason for doing that. They were afraid that I was coming back to get my property or something like that. The second thing was when we got to Slovakia, when I went to the bank to get some local currency, well, one of the bills was a picture of one of the leaders of the fascist leaders that sent the Jews to Auschwitz. Raised my blood pressure. So this was just the beginning. So I could spend an hour telling you what I found over there. So I'll just give you 2 or 3 examples. So the first place that I went to, I took the kids, the Americans they had no iPhones then. There was all these video cameras. The house where I lived. A guy comes out and he asked me, "What am I doing here?" I told him I used to live in this apartment 50 years ago. He looked at me, figured out who I must be some Jew. And he looked at me and he told me, all right, so let your kids take the pictures and get the hell out of here. Except he used different word. It was number 1. Then, can I see next picture? So, oh, by the way, so that this is, I should have shown you, this is me, my parents and I in 1939. Okay, the next. This is my dad and I in 1938 at a resort in Slovakia. Okay, can you go to next, please? So this is a synagogue in the town where my grandfather lived. And at that time, when we came there was only one Jew left in town, and all he took care of the synagogue and the cemetery. The day that we got there, he was busy whitewashing the outside of the synagogue because it was full of swastikas. So swastikas. Now, in the synagogue, there was a plaque with my grandfather's name. I guess he must have been a macher, probably on the board of directors or something. And my wife's family also came from the same town. And this man who was taking care of the synagogue climbed up to the attic, and he brought back a book of a Talmud, which he gave to my sons. It belonged to their great grandfather. So could you go next, please? Next picture. So this is the town. This is the town square of this town. There's the center. You see the church and all the buildings all around it, which was the fanciest houses in this town. And 80% of these houses were owned by Jews. And of course, when all this happened, it was all lost. Can you go to the next, please? Now, here is the picture of the typical train, how they're shoving the Jews into the cattle cars. You notice there are no Nazis there, no Germans, only the local people, local police. They're loading them into the trains. Go ahead. Next. This is a picture of the original of the cemetery. You see that it was desecrated. That this cemetery, there were Jews living in this town 600 years ago, and the Jewish cemetery was desecrated. Go next, please. Next. Lior. Next picture. Are you having trouble? Okay. So here, in the last 15 years, you see there's a new gate to the cemetery. There are many people who originally came from this town. Some of them living in Israel and in the United States, wealthy donors. They fixed up the cemetery. You see the fence so nobody could get in. Can I have the next one, please? And this is the cemetery as it looks today. It was completely repaired. And as a matter of fact, there are about 1,300 graves there. And in this age of science, there's a website, and if you punch in the name of somebody that you're looking for, the tombstone comes right up right online, and it's being taken care of. And then there's as I said, all these people who came from that town, they renovated the synagogue and they have monuments there now. And every year there's a reunion there. And by the way, it's ironic that it's being partially funded by the local government for a very good reason. It's put on the map as a Jewish heritage site, and anybody that comes to Slovakia, if you comes wants to see the old Jewish towns, they come here, and the town makes money. I'm being a little bit facetious, but unfortunately, that's how it is. But in the meantime, this is a cemetery. Okay, you can take it off. And the last thing that I wanted to tell you what happened was, I went to visit, wanted to go to see the village where my mother's family came from. I had never been there in my life. It was right near the Polish and Ukrainian border. I asked my other aunt, how will I find it? Over the years, I heard so many stories about this beautiful farm. And so my aunt told me, you drive into town, small village, drive to the railroad station. You'll see there you'll see a wooden bridge, make a right turn, and then you'll see the big stone house. So of course we drove in to the station. I saw looking for the wooden bridge. There is no more wooden bridge now, it's a steel bridge. I make a right turn and I start walking down the street with my kids. And they're filming it. And a lady comes and she says, are you looking for something? So I said, my grandparents lived on this street. And she said to me, are you looking for the Jewish houses? I said, yes, I do. So, well, this is where they used to live, but I'm not sure. I have to find somebody who will be able to help you. So of course she brought out this old lady who knew all the stuff. And I explained to her what I was looking for. And she points to a house and she says to me, that's where the Jews prayed. And that was the house because this was such a small village. There was no synagogue there. And I remember my mother telling me that her father used to conduct services in his house. So while all this was going, two guys come running crazy down the street and screaming, are the Jews here to get their houses? So the reason that I'm pointing this out is that even 50 years ago, anti-Semitism, today I don't have to prove it to you. Everybody knows what's going on. Nothing has changed. It's still the same thing. Yes, maybe there are some young people who, are okay. So, but after all this, that's why after all this, I speak to schools. I talk to schools. I go to some of the toughest schools in New York City. It's on their curriculum. I go to schools with majority of Hispanic and black students. They actually listen to every word that I say. Unfortunately, I've spoken in some Hebrew schools, and I don't get the same attention. As a matter of fact, a couple of times I wanted to walk out because I was disgusted that the kids just didn't care. So we're back to Maccabi USA. Maccabi USA gets all these young kids, athletes who've never been exposed to, some of them never been exposed to Judaism, and they instill in them the love of Judaism. They know who they are, and that's why we are such a great organization. So, and I'm going to continue doing this, and it's very, very important. And basically, that's my story. And I'm honored that you invited me here today, and I'm glad that I was able to tell the story. Thank you very much.
So Fred has generously offered to answer questions. I know it's a lot to listen to, it's a lot to process, but we have a little bit of time, maybe 5 minutes. If somebody has questions, if you want to type them in the chat or just open your mic, please do. And we appreciate you sharing this with us tonight, Fred.
Can I say something? Can I ask my son Stephen, who I see sitting with my granddaughter? He was on the trip. Maybe he would like to add a few words.
Sure. Let me find Stephen so I can open his mic. Or Stephen, go ahead, open your mic,
Yeah.
if you would.
Can
And
you
we
hear
will,
us?
while
Yes.
we switch the spotlight so people can see you, if you want to start sharing, and we'll get
Okay.
you on screen.
Well, I'll be talking, but I'm sure everyone will be staring at Sarah,
Of
um,
course.
who turns 9 tomorrow. Um, well, the trip, and my brother is also on the Zoom. I mean, my dad was not kidding. My brother and I did an awful lot of lobbying and cajoling until he was ready to take the trip. And it was a different Slovakia. It was only um, it was less than 10 years after the Iron Curtain had fallen, and it was still very rural. But um, you can tell the anti-Semitism that my father described was very real, and it still exists throughout Eastern Europe. And yet, you also have the paradox that countries like Slovakia and Poland are very supportive of Israel in foreign policy. So you just don't know how history is going to evolve. I think the most important thing that we value from my dad's experience is that he's shared it with us. He shared his story, my aunt's story, our relatives on my mom's side's story, and we're able to continue to share that. And that's really the idea, whether it's understanding Jewish history or teaching Jewish history through sport and the Maccabee movement, which I was proud to participate in. Um, that's what's going to keep us united and together. So that's really all I want to add, aside from the fact that I won some of your pink berries, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Yeah.
Freddie, there's a question here. I'm gonna
Yeah.
bring you back up here. There's a question. Did anyone from Slovakia share any remorse or acknowledgement of their role in the Holocaust when you were there?
Well, I absolutely. I mean, I didn't have any. I didn't have any contact with any local people other than the one Jew that I mentioned. But it's. Uh, I mean, the, when Slovakia's government, the president was a Catholic priest who was. Who was in charge of the government. He was executed after the war, but his picture appears in many places. They try to make him into a. They went to the Vatican. They wanted to make him a saint till there was so much opposition that they dropped the thing. So I mean, I'm looking at I have very hard feelings. So I know. I hate in other words, no love lost.
Yeah, understood. Um, any other questions? I don't see any in the chat, and we are coming up on 8.
Hey, doing? It's Jeff. Fred,
Don't
it's
have
Jeff.
Oh, hey, Jeff.
How you doing, Fred? Thanks so much for
Mm.
doing this tonight. Tremendous. You know, my mom was from Slovakia too, from Nova Zamki.
Oh,
How
the
far?
Jeff. Hey, Jeff.
There he is.
Great
Even
game
with a
last
Rangers
night.
cap,
Great
we'll let
game
him
last
on.
night.
Fred, first of all, let everyone here has to know that if the Rangers' first game was tonight, we would have rescheduled this
You're
event.
damn right. Thank you.
So, Fred, my mom, Alice, was from Nova Zamki in Slovakia. How far was that from where you grew up?
What was the name?
Nova Zamki, Newcastle.
Well, I know the area. I would say about probably 30 miles from where
Oh,
I
so
was.
not very close. Yeah. Wow.
I didn't know that you had Slovak roots.
Yeah, we never really talked about it. And it's just sort of I didn't know that that's where you were from either.
Well, now you know.
Yeah,
So,
amazing.
by the
Listen,
way, for those in the audience who don't recognize the new slimmed down version of Jeff
I
Buchan's,
was
it's
going to say,
Jeff is president of Maccabi USA, and he's going to proudly lead the largest delegation ever into the next Maccabiah in the summer of 2025. So we appreciate Jeff coming on, and and spending some time with us as well. If there's no more questions, we'll
I have a comment.
Oh,
I have a
sure.
comment, if you don't mind, not a question.
Sure.
First of all, my name is Seymour Rifkin. Fred, thank you very much for coming on. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He lost all of his brothers and the whole family in concentration camps. He survived. He's the lone survivor, and I'm the first son. And also am involved with the Maccabi. I competed in the 1969 Maccabi, and currently the fastest growing sport in the United States right now is pickleball, and I'm pleased to say that we've been accepted as a sport in the next Maccabi. So I just want to thank you for your continued sharing. There's not very many survivors left. There's still every once in a while someone that says that the Holocaust never happened. And, I, for one, as a first generation Holocaust survivor, will continue to make certain that those lies do not get any traction. There still is a significant amount of anti-Semitism. I travel quite a bit around the world. And the one thing my dad taught me at a very, very young age was, history can repeat itself. And we're beginning to see some of that anti-Semitism here in the United States with what's going on in Israel. So I just want to thank you for continuing, what I know is a difficult discussion and a difficult talk. But it's people that are survivors like yourself that are a testament to what really did take place. So thank you.
I hope to say something also. My name is Jody Meisenberg. My daughter played Maccabi sports. She was on the U.S. basketball team. She now lives in Israel. She's been there for 8 years, and she currently works for Israel Parasport.
Oh.
Are you familiar with that organization?
Absolutely. It's the Elan Sports. It used to be called the Elan Sports Center. I've been involved with them. I'm still involved with them since 1981. And it's an incredible, incredible organization.
Incredible organization. The basketball team was supposed to play in Turkey a couple months ago, and obviously,
right,
reasons we know they didn't go, so they came to the United States and played tournaments in Arizona and California.
Yes, I know. I know.
Thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
So again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight, and to thank Fred for being so generous. Personal stories are sometimes the hardest to tell. And, we promise that this recording of your story and your story is going to live on. And even when you are too tired to tell it, we'll tell it for you. And we love you, Freddie. It's good to see you. And we'll talk soon. So
Great.
Good night, everyone. And thank
Night.
you.
Bless you, Fred. So long.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow, Dad.